So good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. I see a few more attendees getting into the room. Hey, Danny, are we ready to roll?
I would say so.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Bill Lawrenson, and I'm the Product Portfolio Manager for the Health Professions team here at Jones & Bartlett Learning. I'm joined by my colleague, Danny Burford, our Marketing Manager, and our friend and partner, Derek Wessler from Junction Education, who you'll be hearing from in just a few minutes. So today is Wednesday, March 10th, 2021, and about a year ago, the world was in a very different place in a lot of different ways. I'm guessing in early spring of 2020, many of your classrooms look, pretty similar to this, or maybe even the next slide for some hands-on learning, and your lectures probably looked, a lot more like this. Flash forward a year to today, and many of our courses, for better or worse, look probably a little more similar to this slide right here. So last spring, I know many of you were faced with not only the reality of the COVID pandemic and what that meant relative to you and your family and personal health, but on top of that, you were faced with the enormous challenge of, in some cases, literally overnight migrating your classes or even your program from ground to online or hybrid. And we know this wasn't easy because we spent most of 2020 right there with you, supporting our customers and helping them transition through this the difficult time. One of the best things that we did to support our customers was to partner with Junction Education and to take content from a number of our leading textbooks and rapidly redevelop them into full online courses. So over the last several months, we've released online courses in a number of high demand healthcare areas such as anatomy and physiology, medical terminology, law and ethics, phlebotomy, medical assisting, and intro to health careers. And over time, as instructors have begun to implement these courses into their programs, we've stayed pretty close with them to help better understand how these products are helping instructors teach more effectively and manage their classes in an online environment. And most importantly, how these courses are having effect on student engagement and ultimately student performance. So as we approach the 1 year anniversary of the COVID migration to online learning, it felt like a pretty good time to regroup and share with you all what we've learned from your experience with our products, and hopefully to leave you with some best practices and takeaways that you may be able to apply to your own courses. So before I turn it over to Derek, I want to mention that we hope this is going to be an interactive talk. Danny and I will be monitoring the questions in the chat box, and we'll answer as many as we can in real time, and we'll also pause at the end for some online questions. We'll try to get to all of them. If there is anything that we're just not able to get to because of time, we promise that we'll follow up with you shortly after the talk. And lastly, at the end of the presentation, we'll be doing a drawing for some Visa gift cards, so please stick around to hopefully hear your name called. So with that, I'll turn it over to Derek.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks everybody for joining the Lunch and Learn, or for those on the West Coast, the Breakfast and Learn. What we wanted to do today is spend a little bit of time and just share some of the lessons that we've learned through this migration to online learning with you, talk about some of the things that we do as relates to that online learning, and just have a bit of a sharing session. The past year has undoubtedly been the most unique year I think that we've seen in education for a very, very long time. Been forced to try new things on the fly, proverbially changing the tire while the car is moving 12 months ago. And some of those new tools and methods that we've adopted have greatly improved learning. Some of those others may be disappearing within the months to come, relegated to the dustbin of history, so to speak. If we look at the popular press, and we've put up a couple of headlines that we've pulled, as they often do, they've made some fantastic proclamations about the future of education, some that suggest that education will never be the same. Others, if you look at the bottom headline about University of Florida expanding in-person classes, suggesting that things may soon be heading back to normal. Today, we're focused less on this sort of top-down view of what is going to fundamentally change about education and what is not. We'll leave that to some of these writers or other people. What we wanted to do was focus on what we learned from those on the ground, those face-to-face with students, whether that be virtual or whether that be for those of you who have actually been face-to-face over the past, either this term or for some of you who may have been face-to-face in the past term. But take some of those lessons and share those with you. Our point of reference is instructors like you, and it's the instructors who have been using our courseware. As Bill mentioned, our courseware is fully online, and it is designed, and has been designed pre-COVID for elements where it's fully online. Not necessarily fully online where it's the classes are held fully online, but the courseware is fully online. So it was a nice seamless transition for our instructors. And it gave us a nice point of reference where they can then say, you know what, when I was forced to go into this fully online environment, it really highlighted some of the things that worked really well and some of the tools that I really liked, and some of them that maybe I didn't need. So our goal is to share that with you, is to get some of your reactions and thoughts about that. So as I'm going through this, if there are things that are resonating, you're like, yes, that absolutely happened, post that, let us know. If there are things that you didn't see, let us know that as well. And if there are things that I don't talk about that you did see and say, there was a tool I used that was really helpful, or there was something that happened with my students that I saw that was really helpful, let us know that as well. The beauty of being a digital courseware provider is that we're constantly able to quickly update our platform to meet your needs. And we like to be driven by what instructors tell us and what students tell us in evolving our platform. So we'll not have you on voice, as much as you're willing to share would be great. So the first lesson of 3 that we wanted to share is that student expectations around content and interface and material have never actually been higher. So just about a year ago to the day, I imagine most of you were sitting around over the weekend figuring out what you were going to be doing the coming Monday, when all of a sudden you were going to be relegated to your garage, where your kids might have been home from their kindergarten classes, and you were being told to taught via Zoom, which 12 months ago, nobody really knew what that was. The immediate sense of adaptiveness, community, and forgiveness, I would say, among students for technology challenges was pretty great. Everybody moved relatively seamlessly to Zoom or GoToMeeting or some online platform, or figured out how to manage it. And people really were forgiving of a lot of these kinds of shortcomings. It was a hard transition to make. 2 terms past that shift to remote, and that forgiveness is gone. Expectations now are that content and material be really good. Giving students simply a bank of material, content from a publisher, quiz questions, things where they might have to work through these kinds of things on their own without some sort of guidance, are gone. They expect now more than Zoom calls and an e-reader. The way we kind of position this is students say, like, I need the content that I need, when I need it, where I expect to find it. I actually say it's even more. It's the content that I don't know I need. I need all of those things. And I need things to be really, really easy. What we're trying to do on our end, and what frankly all courseware providers should be doing, is thinking about how to anticipate student needs. Think about anticipating the challenges that they're going to be going through as they're reviewing their material, and trying to get out in front of it, sequencing things in a way that makes sense, giving them the tools that they need one click away. If I'm thinking about, say, a medical terminology course where I have definitions, well, I better have some audio pronunciation right next to it, because these are going to be new words. If I'm going to be giving students a practice quiz, I better have some sort of remediation right there so they know what comes next. I like to say that they have a very low tolerance for frustration, and Google, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, is just one click away. And if students get frustrated with interface, with content, it takes them 3 seconds to click to Google, to click to YouTube, to click to something else, and they're gone. And for better or for worse, we're competing in the courseware platform arena with the likes of Facebook and Instagram and those places. And if any of you have watched people, if any of you even used Facebook or seen how your kids may use Facebook, it's very clear that they know exactly what to do next. And those platforms are designed to keep the user engaged. And that's what we're competing with. So I always say here, our responsibility at Junction is to deliver courseware to you, to meet those expectations, and to compete with the likes of Google or YouTube or Chegg or Course Hero, because that's what we're actually competing with. Those student expectations around what they should be provided are now higher than ever, and I don't think they're going to get lower. I think they're going to continue to get higher and higher and higher, and that's our goal, is to meet them. So in terms of some of the things that we've done, let me talk about what we're doing to exceed those expectations. And while I'm going to use our system, Junction, and the courseware that we've delivered with Jones and Bartlett as the reference here, because this is what we have, these lessons can and should be applied across the board. So if you're using your LMS as kind of the core of your course, these lessons can be learned as well. You're looking at a range of publisher materials, which many of you are and should be. These are some of the things that we've brought to market that you should be asking questions about. You should be looking at however you're building these kinds of materials. Let's also know that this is not a complete list. So please add things as we're going through this. So the first thing that I want to talk about is a workflow that follows learning, a workflow that makes sense. And I always like to say, like, we've trained students very well with the textbook. And if you ask a student where they start with a textbook on a particular chapter, it's a pretty obvious answer. It's almost a silly question. I start at the beginning of the chapter and I simply start reading. When we've looked at digital materials, when we now need to replicate that workflow, that scope, that sequence the same way. We like to follow a very basic learn, practice, assess, remediate kind of model. Those of you, you're all instructors, so you've been trained in education. That's a very simple model, but it may not be simple and basic and obvious to your students. So they may not understand that that's the right way or that is a good way to go through material. So if you see the screenshot, what we do is we make sure that we sequence the material in a way where students are going through, at least at first, through a somewhat linear fashion. We want to make sure that when they ask the question, where do I go next? What am I supposed to do next? That they know exactly what it is. So sequencing these kinds of things in a way that makes sense to them is really critical, and making sure that they know what to do next. Part of this is also interfaces, having very clean and simple interfaces. If we have interfaces where students end up having 3 or 4 or 5 tabs open in their browser because we're opening all of this material, it gets very easy to get lost, and that path through the material gets lost. As relates to content, how we've defined content has changed. And I spent a long time working at one of the big 3 publishers. And what students say is educational content now is not just text reading. We still use that as the spine, if you will, the structure of a course. But content now includes everything from short little text readings to videos to interactives to shared notes to all of this sort of wealth of things that students think are content. When we look at that, we've been very careful about what we actually want to bring in to our courses. Video is obviously critical. Whenever we interview students and we say, when you're sitting down to start studying, what is the first thing where's the first place you go? And Google and YouTube show up as the first answers more often than not. Video is a great way to introduce students to topics. It's a great way to get them introduced to, especially in the allied health and nursing fields where you have medical terminology, you have new terminology, things that students don't know how to pronounce. It's a great way to get students introduced. But it's more than that. What we found is that videos that are longer than, say, 5 minutes on average need to be really, really good. They need to have high production value, and they need to be very, very well aligned to the content. If not, students simply don't watch them. And by the way, when students click play on a video, when you've asked students this, they look at the clock in the bottom right corner to see how long the video is. And they're far more likely to watch a video that is 2 minutes, 30 seconds than a video that is 12 minutes and 30 seconds. So bringing in the right length video is really important. The other thing that we found is that video is not just video, that the kind of video that exists now can actually serve very different purposes within courseware. So there's certain video that is what I would say concept related. It teaches the concept. It almost substitutes for what you might do in a lecture. It's one kind of video. There's another kind of video that expands upon a concept. And we see this a lot within the allied health fields. And when we select videos, we look for a lot of these. It's not the video that's going to explain the concept, but it is going to show a video that is going to show the concept in practice. So if it's a phlebotomy course, it might actually show a phlebotomist in a lab trying to actually draw blood. So it's not going to teach the concept, but it's going to show how the concept is delivered in practice. And then finally, there are videos that are really about problem solving. So if I step back and I ask you, think about Khan Academy videos versus maybe TED Ed videos, very, very different. And how those are actually sequenced into a course is very, very important. Simply giving students this bank of videos and saying, watch them is not enough. They need to know why they're watching them, and they need to be sequenced in a way to help a student make it through that material in that learning workflow. And finally, not surprisingly, we've seen a great response to assessment as a learning tool. It may not be in this screenshot that you can see right now. This is a practice assessment. So practice quizzes are good, but coupling low stakes self-evaluation with pinpoint remediation is great. So giving students the opportunity to take a test, because ultimately that's how they're going to be evaluated. So they're getting practice at test taking, but they're also then, when they get something wrong, it's immediate remediation. So we're able to use testing and assessment as a learning tool. That's also really helpful, because if we think about where our students are and where they're learning today, it's not usually I'm going to go back to my dorm room and spend 90 minutes studying this one particular topic. It's, I've got 10 minutes on the bus, or I have 5 minutes before my next class starts. And building out these kinds of things like a short practice quiz allows students to make the most of that 5 minutes before class, or that 10 minutes on the bus, when they probably wouldn't open a textbook or a chapter reading, because it's just not efficient to actually do that for 5 minutes. But test prep really works nicely. Our second big learning, this one, if I think about the old adage of the more things change, the more things stay the same, that's kind of this one. So maintaining a personal touch is critical. Said a little bit differently, instructors still matter. In fact, instructors probably matter more so than before. If I opened a poll in GoToMeeting here right now and asked all of you if you've ever been standing in front of your class, looked around, and could just tell that certain students didn't understand what you were talking about, I bet all of you would say yes. It's the mark of a good instructor. It's the value of face-to-face instruction and being able to tell what students are getting and what students aren't. The instructor is a tool to diagnose a student's learning, and remediate is often the first and the last line of defense. But when your students are postage squares on a Zoom call, the image that Bill showed earlier, it's actually hard to do that. It's especially hard when you're an instructor who's looking at those screens while also trying to control a PowerPoint and keep on clock and doing all of those things. So it's very hard to maintain that personal touch. Let's now couple that with how material has started to be used in this online world, where we're sending students to what might be considered generic publisher materials. And it could be the same material, the same course, the same readings that a student is using from Washington to Wyoming to West Virginia. And when we think about that I have this Zoom model where then I'm going to a product that just is generic test questions or a generic reading, it's easy to see why students can feel like they're taking a correspondence course. But that's not the way it has to be, and it's not necessarily the way it is. A lot of instructors have already started to customize your courses, whether that's through content or graphics or assignments or personal elements. You found different ways to communicate with your students. When I think about this time last year, and I think about instructors taking cell phone calls from their students, that was relatively unheard of. Instructors texting with their students. It was kind of that boundary where instructors said, no, that's my personal life. You can email me on my school account and I can do that. But text messaging was not going to happen. Now, not so much. So instructors have found ways to adapt here and to manage this, because replacing the knowledge gained by you as an instructor through in-person interaction is critical. Now, the good news is that we are in a digital world where we can solve a lot of these problems. So let's talk about ways to do this. And this is an area, as I mentioned, where we've seen a lot of ingenuity from instructors. And this can be small group work, where it's given the instructor the ability to break down a large class in an online environment and learn more. We've seen some oral exams come back. We've heard of some instructors doing outdoor class sessions where you can actually be in person but be distanced. So you can still replace some of that. And we'd love to hear more of those. We'd especially love to hear about things you may have done online, because we can now help you through a platform. We can help you in a more systemic, technology-based way. From the courseware perspective, where we're sitting, customizing the look and feel of your course interface can help take your course from what might be generic state U course and make it personal. We've seen instructors do this through a bunch of different ways, through imagery. So you can see in my little screenshot here, I have my welcome page with my picture on it. An image, a little personalization can go a really long way. We've also seen instructors customize the course navigation. So you'll see here that I have my lessons, but I've brought in things like dates. So in this case, I'm bringing in the dates and I'm using my course interface as a way to provide more information that is specific to my course section. It could be a date, it could say week 1, it could say week 2, but making this immediately recognizable as not something generic, as not something as the same as the instructor down the hall, or worse, at the school in a different state, is really critical to help maintaining that personal touch. It's not a big lift, but it's something that can go a long way. The next thing that we've seen that's really valuable is this notion of adding personalized content. And one of the most effective things we've seen are these 1 to 2 minute instructor webcam videos where the instructor is talking about the lesson ahead. It's not the content in a lot of these. So it's not the, I'm going to teach you about mitosis, or I'm going to teach you about phlebotomy, or I'm going to teach you about the integumentary system. It's talking about why the topic is important, how it fits into the broader course, and how perhaps it fits into the broader major or the broader career that you're looking to. You can think about these things as this might be the beginning of your lecture on a specific topic. When you have your PowerPoints up there and it's that first page, you're talking about context. You're talking about why you're learning this, not so much the meat of the lesson, but the context. These kinds of short videos, which are really low production value, right? It's just you sitting in front of a webcam, as you can see here, talking to your students, can go a really long way in terms of making your course personal. It gives students that ability, like, yeah, I kind of know my professor. I know what they look like. I know what they sound like. And it makes you far more approachable. Students have told us that these are a really, really nice tool. And finally, reaching students at the right time. So again, I'm preaching to the choir in terms of how a good instructor operates, right? Figuring out when a student needs remediation and reaching out to them. But it's harder in an online world. So what we're trying to do is allow the technology to help you figure out who needs to be remediated. So what you're seeing here, this is a learning gauge that we bring into each course. And our engagement tracker. So our engagement tracker is going to break down your course for you, and it's going to show you which students are on track. So that means they're meeting the cut score, versus which students are struggling, versus which students are disengaged. We define struggling students as those that are putting in the effort. So they're spending time in the material, or they're going through the reading, they're taking their exams, but they're not succeeding, but they're trying. Disengaged students are not meeting the cut score, but those are the students who are not spending time in the material. So this dial, you'll be able to click on it, you'll be able to see all of those students. What we're trying to do is take some of the legwork, take some of the grunt work off of you, where you don't have to go through and say, all right, let me see who's getting what score, and let me see how much time they're spending, if I even have that, and try to connect those dots. We want to get this information to you so you can go ahead and then reach out to these students. We hear time and time again from instructors that this struggling student cohort, the students that are putting in the effort, but not doing well, those are the students that you're going to put your arms around. Those are the students that you're going to reach out to, and you're going to make sure that they pass the course. So we wanted to make that as simple as possible for you. And the final lesson that we want to talk about is simplicity and usability. Said plainly, if it's not dead simple to use, then we've all got a problem. I think back to my days when I was at one of the big 3 publishers, and we would actually send digital learning consultants onto some of the larger campuses at the beginning of the term to train students on how to use their system. They'd go into a big mega section and spend the last 10 minutes training on one of these big homework platforms. Those days are gone, and not because of COVID, but because the bar has been raised. I think about this as the curse of Apple. Apple makes products so easy to use that those who aren't keeping up just look bad. If we think about what students are going through, they're managing dozens of different platforms. They have a personal email, they have a school email, they have their text messages, they have their LMS, they have multiple different courseware platforms for multiple different courses, and that's just their academic life. A lot of these students are also working, they've got their personal, and there's really little tolerance for learning new systems. Now, that isn't to say that we want to push everything to a single platform, because that's not the right answer. While we want to push a product that doesn't require training, that also isn't necessarily the case. But the product that the student has to use, this interface, has to be dead simple. When a problem arises, which it invariably will, it has to be resolved quickly. When an error occurs, it can't break the system. As I mentioned, there's very little tolerance for this. There's very little tolerance for bad technology. There's very little tolerance for things that work. And the challenge here is that if you provide a bad experience or a frustrating experience, you're probably going to mean that the great content that's sitting behind that is just never used. It's never found, and it's never experienced. And ultimately, that leads to low course completion rates, which is really what we're trying to fight. So in terms of how we do that, and again, I'm preaching, I presume, a little bit to the choir here, LMS integration. So 12 months ago, we had less than 50% of our instructors do any sort of LMS integration. And that was even simply single sign-on. More than half of instructors were happy to place a web link into their LMS and tell students, enroll with this course code, create an account, do whatever you want to do. Those days are gone. In fact, now we're seeing, we're getting close to a majority of instructors not only asking for single sign-on web integration, LMS integration, but complete gradebook integration. And that means that it's an LTI 1.3 integration for those of you who are getting deep into the technology. It means that there is complete roster integration between our courseware and your LMS. It means that there is complete gradebook integration. If a student sees one grade on our side and the grade on your LMS is different, we've got a problem. So that deep integration to make life easy for students is critical. The next thing is providing students immediate resolution to any of their issues. We're very proud that our incidence of help calls is well below the industry average, but they do happen. When you serve tens of thousands of students, people will run into issues. When they do run into these issues, we resolve a majority of these issues at first point of contact, because that student that's spending that time learning can't be sidetracked. They've got their 15 minutes on the bus, and if something gets in their way, that's a lost 15 minutes. That's never going to come back. And we recognize that when it comes to learning, that learning sometimes fills the cracks in between the day of a student. And if you lose it, it's gone. It's not something that's going to come back. So providing immediate resolution to any issue that comes up is really critical. And finally, this last piece around usability isn't related only to technology. It's related to problems with learning. So when we talk about being dead simple to use, it's got to meet an awful lot of criteria related to content too. How many times do we hear this where a student says, I read this, but I still don't understand? Or I don't know why I got this wrong. Or I'm frustrated that I have to read this really long chapter. We've heard these complaints, we've heard these challenges, and we've worked to provide what we want to think about as first call resolution to these content or learning issues as well. And they can take a number of different forms. So this could be explainer videos that are tied to long readings for students that may just not have the capacity or the time to do a long reading. It may be audio pronunciation that's aligned to medical terminology. So they're going to read this term, which is brand new, it's Latin, it's Greek. They don't understand. They want to learn how to pronounce it so they know how to get it right. They don't make mistakes on their assessments, giving them those things right there. It might be an ebook with a read aloud capability. So you can push the button on the ebook and it will be read to you. Or even things like SMS alerts. So we send SMS alerts to students on their phones with reminders about their coursework. So what we're trying to do is make the system really dead simple and keep it dead simple for students, anticipating all of those different challenges that they might see, that they might face. And as I mentioned, these are the things that we have built into our system and our application. You're using lots of different tools out there, and you should be. As you're looking at those tools, keep all of these things in mind. As you're looking at our tools, please think about all of those different things that you see in other tools that you might really like, and let us know. Our goal in designing all of these things and building all of these things ultimately is to get students through the courses. But the way we do that is by making things simpler for students and also making things simpler for you, the instructor. We know that you're time starved, and if we can save you minutes, those are minutes that you're more likely to spend with a student. So in terms of what success looks like to us, success looks like course completion. And we do track that. We're seeing 90+% course completion rates, which is great. We see student preference, for our platform. And the other thing that we see, and it's something that we actually track a lot of, is this notion of multi-device usage. So you can see down at the bottom here that we do get the students on average do not come to our platform from one device. They come to our platform from multiple devices, whether it be a desktop or a tablet or phone. And not surprising, what they're doing on those devices is actually very different. We see far less time spent on the pages that have heavy reading on phones, not surprisingly. But we do see a lot more time spent on videos and assessments. So we're constantly looking at this, and we're constantly looking at ways to take those lessons that we're learning and continue to make them better capabilities and better for students. In terms of the courses available now, we've got a range of courses in the health and nursing fields, and those courses will continue to expand. The courses, when you do a Dr. Junction course, it comes with the ebook, it comes with all of the ancillary materials. We'd be more than happy to show you all of these courses in total. I know we've picked up a couple of the elements of our courses and shown them to you here. If you are interested in a greater product demo, we're obviously we're happy to set you up and show you one of those. We're also happy to give you access to any of these particular courses. Let me now open up to some questions. And Bill, I know you've been managing the chat. So for those of you who had questions, if you hadn't put them in the chat already, feel free to do that right now. We've got some user feedback you can read while we're taking some of those questions. But now I'll open it up, Bill, to ask any of the questions that came up during the presentation that we can answer.
Okay, great, Derek. We got a couple here. The first one we'll go to is around personalization, making your course personal. And I'll paraphrase the question. Some schools, including mine, want a standardized class layout. They don't want to frustrate students with different course paths. Other than things like welcome videos, do you have any other tips or advice about how to personalize the experience while still maintaining a standard course layout?
Sure, and that's a great question. This sort of balance between keeping things relatively simple for students versus giving it the personalization. What I would say, and what we typically offer back to instructors, is that the value of the personalization is often not content explanation. So between the content that's provided as part of the textbook, the additional videos, the assessments, all of those things, they typically do a pretty good job of the core content. where the value in the customization is broader context. So let's talk about why we're learning about the integumentary system. Let me tell you what the 2 or 3 things that are really important to pay attention to as you're going through this material. Maybe it's a little anecdote about something that you thought about when you were learning this material. So it's the benefit of putting your face to the content and giving it a little bit of personality. And you can do that with those short videos. So I would almost say that this is kind of the 80-20 rule, that if you put in that sort of 20% by just a short video, you're probably getting 80% of the value. The only other place where some personalization can help is if you find that your students are struggling with one particular topic area. So, like we've gone through this, and whether it's a particular system or whether it's a particular learning objective that your students with the material that's provided still aren't getting it, some instructors then go through and say, okay, we've been struggling with the integumentary system. Let's put together this 5-minute video that gets a little bit deeper into this particular topic. And maybe it's going through a problem on a homework that students got wrong, or maybe it's going through a whiteboard session, but creating that one video and then adding it to the lesson. So you're not going to break that structure. You're not going to break that sequence that your school is using, but you might add point videos that can help your students in one particular area.
Great. Okay, question around just time management in class prep. So in the past, instructors who were teaching asynchronous online classes spent an average of 10 to 15 hours per week prepping online courses, looking for ideas to prepare quality lessons, but decrease off work time spent teaching.
So is the question how to minimize it?
I think I think it's how to maximize the time, get the best quality lesson plan in the least amount of time, right?
Yeah. So let me offer this. So part of our intent in designing Junction courses was to take a lot of that burden off of you. So we have thought through what a typical lesson plan would entail. We've included OER videos, we've included practice, we've included the readings. What we try to do is aim for center, right? We try to aim for center of the bullseye, and then bring in some customization tools. So you can go in and you can customize these courses as you like. And if you say, you know what, I'm the kind of instructor that likes to give the lecture first and then have students go do the reading, you can do that. If you want to give the lecture after the assessment, the homework, so you can have a sense of what students know and what don't, you can do all of that reordering. So we've tried to give you a bit of a shortcut there. The other thing that I would say, and this is kind of true of most systems, is that the first time you go through this, there's going to be learning. There's going to be, how do I set this up? What we found is that the time needed as you go from semester 1 to semester 2 to semester 3 to semester 4 really starts to fall off to almost nothing. And the beauty of using courseware, and again, whether it's our courseware or anybody else's courseware, is twofold. Is that one is that your changes term to term should be very incremental. There is no notion of, oh, I've gone from the 9th edition of the textbook to the 10th edition of the textbook and everything's changed. That the changes are very, very incremental. There's also the value that we as the courseware provider are making updates behind the scenes. So as new videos become available that work well, we're going to put those in. As new assessment items or item types come in, we're going to put those in for you. We also track in aggregate student performance. So you may see in your anatomy and physiology course that students are struggling with a particular topic. We're looking at that across every anatomy and physiology course. And as we then go through revisions, we're going to look at that. And we may say, you know what, we're not going to touch the the chapter on the muscular system, because frankly, everybody's doing really well on it. But the skeletal system lesson, it's just not good. We see students struggling. We see a lot of need for remediation. So we're going to focus there. So we're trying to take some of that burden off you as well.
Okay. Great. My school requires that we deliver online instruction on the Blackboard LMS. How does your course and platform integrate with LMS?
Yep, it's a good question. So without getting too technical, we are LTI compliant. We are LTI 1.1 compliant and LTI 1.3 compliant. What that means is we can work with you or your LMS administrator and basically drop a link or any number of links into your Blackboard course homepage. A student would click it. They would automatically be registered with us. They would automatically be enrolled in your particular course. It would pop open in a new tab. When they take assessments on our end, those assessments would automatically sync with Blackboard, so the grade books would be synchronous. All of that would move back and forth seamlessly. There's a number of different levels of integrations that we can do depending on what you want, depending on what your school requires. It could be just simply a sign-on link. It could be a link that pushes back grades. There's also ways to set what we call deep links. So if you said, you know what, I want to take students directly to chapter 2 or directly to this page, you can do all of that as well.
Okay. All right, so this is around student preparedness. Is there any data or even anecdotal evidence that your platform, students learning with your platform, has a positive effect on students being more prepared for lecture?
So it's a good question. So we haven't taken a study to look specifically at that. What we look at are, and part of it is limited by what we can actually track, are course completion rates. And then anecdotal studies or anecdotal discussions with professors where they have used our system. Now, I will say that it gets a little tricky because some of our instructors actually use the lecture first, and the model that they want to use is, I want to talk to the students about whatever this particular topic is before they then go off and do the reading and do the homework. So it's not applicable. But when we do talk to instructors about using that model, the feedback is always very positive. I think there's actually a quote, which you may or may not be able to read on the screen. I think it's the Bradley University student professor who actually said that. And his model was fairly generic: have the students go through the material, then we'll have our discussion in class. We've also had a number of instructors use more of a flipped classroom model, so really focusing on getting students to do work before class and then coming to class and simply having a discussion rather than a lecture. Not quite as popular in the nursing and allied health field as it is in some other fields. But anecdotally, yes, students are doing that. And you as the instructor, by the way, you can see that. So in our reports, you can see where students are spending their time and if they've spent time in a particular lesson.
Okay. All right, another question about LMS, Canvas. Does it integrate with Canvas?
Yes, absolutely. So as a LTI compliant, we can integrate with any LTI compliant LMS, which, and it's not a complete list, would be Canvas, Blackboard, Moodle, D2L, Sakai, Schoology. I think that's all that we've run into.
Okay. All right, and here, I guess not a question, but I guess just to share with the group. So I love the information about providing a personal touch in order to keep my phone number private. I use GroupMe. This allows students to engage with each other as well as send private messages to me. So thank you for that. GroupMe is, I use that too in my personal life for some youth sports that I'm involved with, and it's a great little tool. All right, that's all I have. Derek, anything on your end? Any questions coming through on your side? Okay. All right, well, thank you all. I appreciate all the interaction and the questions, and Derek, as always, thank you.